You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us.
Movies inspired by real crimes, cruise ship deaths and disappearances, crimes that shape the course of history, and crimes involving families.
These are just a few of the series you can find on Corpus Delicti. Corpus Delicti is a weekly true crime podcast that takes a series approach, spending several weeks at a time discussing crime within a certain topic.
Hosted by two Southern belles, we bring you compelling stories with a hint of Southern charm. Sometimes the stories will make you cry. Sometimes you might even laugh, but they're stories you won't want to miss.
Find Corpus Delicti on your favorite podcast app by searching for CORPUSDELICTI and join us every Tuesday. Hope to see you then.
Hi, I'm Johanna, and you just heard Jen and Lindsay from Corpus Delicti, and I especially enjoyed the True Crime Theater series, so you should definitely go and check them out. And the best thing is you can listen to their new episodes every Tuesday, and it will shorten the wait for our episodes that come out every Wednesday, as you know.
I'm Annie Bellavano, and this is the Fresh Hell podcast.
That was a bit formal.
I know, I used all my names. Well, most of them. But yeah, I grew up listening to NPR forcibly as a child, but then by choice as an adult. And I've just always wanted to say that. But of course, this isn't National Public Radio. This is the Fresh Hell podcast. And you, Johanna, are my partner in true crime in Vienna, Austria. How are things in Vienna lately?
It's lovely. We are having a beautiful fall so far. The sun is out, but it's like, these cool, fresh mornings already.
I love it. I'm loving the cooler weather here, too. Pretty soon the leaves are going to start to really change. It started a little bit, but pretty soon it'll start in earnest, and it's going to be sweater season. I have a pretty great sweater body. I'm not going to lie. Honest to God. Just put me in a really heavy Irish knit sweater, and it's just like a sea of cabled worsted wool, and I'll smell a little bit like a wet dog, but I mean, it's just eat your heart out. I love sweater weather. It's the best. It's the best. All right, shall we get into it? Because today I have a story that is very well known in the Boston area, but I'm not sure how well people outside this area will know it. It's shocking and incredibly sad. Today I'm going to tell you about the murders of Carol and Christopher DiMaiti.
I don't know this one. I'm actually looking forward to hearing it. But first, is there anything we need to warn our listeners about?
Yes. So this is the story of the murder of a pregnant woman, and her baby also does not make it. So please keep that in mind. I know that's going to be a tough one for a lot of listeners. We will also be briefly discussing suicide. And as always, we have links pinned to our Facebook page with mental health resources should you or someone you love need them.
All right, let's talk about this. It sounds like it's another incredibly sad story. But then again, aren't all our stories incredibly sad?
They are. One of these days, we're going to have to try to find a happy murder. Ooh, I just thought of one. All right. Anyway, so here we go. Carol DiMaiti, she was born on March 26, 1959, and she grew up in Medford, Massachusetts, which is a suburb of Boston. But her parents were both originally from the North End, which is the Italian part of downtown Boston. You know, in the 1990s, like late 1999-ish, I looked at a room for rent in the North End, and it was literally a small walk-in closet in a 4-story walk-up, and it was shared with 4 other people for $650 a month. So North End, that was like 20 years ago. Wow, that was 20 years ago, so expensive place to live. But her parents had moved to Medford, which is where they raised their kid. I lived in Medford too, but only for a couple of years, or Metha, as the locals might say. It's a nice suburb. It's on the Mystic River, about 3 miles northwest of downtown Boston, although you wouldn't know it's that close by the traffic it takes you to get there. There are a lot of multifamily homes, what we call double or triple deckers, which is a 2 or 3 story house with each floor having sort of an identical 2 or 3 bedroom layout apartment in it. This style of house was really popular in the Northeast United States in the late 1800s and early 1900s, so the Victorian era. What else can I tell you about Medford? Oh, Paul Revere rode down Main Street during his midnight ride. I can still recite that poem from like the 5th grade. Oh, the song Jingle Bells, that was written in a tavern in Medford after watching a sleigh race from Medford to Malden. And if this is all sounding a bit too fucking chipper, here are some bummer facts about Medford. The gypsy moth was being experimented on back in the late 1860s by a Frenchman named Leopold Trouvelot. He was a French astronomer and naturalist, and he was trying to figure out a way to make silk in a less expensive way, and so he was experimenting with these gypsy moth caterpillars. However, he did not keep a careful watch, and some of those mothy motherfuckers escaped his home on Myrtle Street. And I think within about 10 years, they deforested the entire neighborhood. So New England, that is the original source of the gypsy moth infestations every year. They will kill a tree by eating all the leaves if they, eat the same tree often enough. They'll drop on you unsuspectingly, like boom, you got a caterpillar on you, and just everything is covered in caterpillars or caterpillar poo. It's disgusting. It's the worst. Also, if that weren't enough, these caterpillars will give some people, including yours truly, a creeping, blistering rash if one of those teeny tiny little pinhead-sized baby ones drops on you from above. So, New England family, you know what I'm talking about. It's a problem. It's problematic. Mistakes were made. And lastly, Elizabeth Short, also known as the Black Dahlia, grew up in Medford before moving to California. So, there's your Medford trivia. There's more, but I'm going to save it for future episodes.
I really think that our listeners must be the fucking bomb in every pub quiz. Like, seriously, they have to rock that.
I mean, I hope so. It's basically my other goal in life, right? So I love pub quiz. My brain is all song lyrics and useless trivia. And so now I get to share it with you guys. All right. So back to our friend, or the girl who I think would have absolutely have been our friend if we had known her. Her name is Carol DiMaiti, and she was a nice girl from Medford. She went to the local Catholic school. It was just around the corner from her house. And her family was just a typically close Italian Roman Catholic working class family. Her dad, I think his name is pronounced Guisto, who everyone called Gino. He worked making pizza dough, and I think he also had a second job as a bartending at night. And her mother, Evelyn, was an administrative assistant for the Massachusetts Agency for Developmental Disabilities. After high school, Carol did very well, and she went to Boston College. And while attending college, like so many of us did, she worked as a waitress at the Driftwood restaurant in Revere. Revere is about 10 minutes from Medford, and that is where she met Charles Stuart, who was working there as a cook. Charles, who usually went by the name Chuck, grew up in Revere. He was the oldest of 6 kids who attended the nearby Catholic elementary school, and he said that he had attended prestigious Brown University on a football scholarship, but had been forced to drop out because of a knee injury. And eventually, he did graduate from Salem State College in Salem, Massachusetts. I'm not going to give you Salem facts. We'll save that for another time. But I gave you a couple of Medford facts, so here are a few from Revere, because you do not want to piss off people from Revere. You know what I mean, kid? All right. Revere was named after Paul Revere, who is kind of a big deal around here, and it's on the Atlantic Ocean, and it had the very first public beach in the United States. It's in Revere, where our girl from, I think it was episode 3 about the Jersey Maneater, Annette Kellerman, the Australian mermaid herself, was arrested for public indecency there in 1907 when she committed the very grievous sin of wearing a swimming costume that was made of one piece. She had designed it, and it didn't include a dress or even pantaloons. It was a huge fucking scandal. The indecency. What else about? Oh, Kelly's Roast Beef was founded in Revere in 1951 along the Revere Beach shoreline. They claim to have invented the modern roast beef sandwich. I don't know if that's true, but it's on their website. But the shore of Revere used to be a lot like Coney Island in New York, so roller coasters and boardwalk, but over time it just fell apart and is no more. And finally, the Necco Candy Factory, which I think is New England Confectionery Company. They made Necco wafers, and they also made those little Valentine message love hearts. Those things. Do you give those to people in Austria on Valentine's Day? Here we have like little conversation hearts that would say like, be mine, or, and you'd give those. So they made those too.
Yeah, we know them from the movies.
Yeah, and so they made those as well as the Necco wafers until last year, which I'm actually kind of unreasonably sad about that this factory closed, because I never actually liked Necco wafers. I think my grandpa used to give them to us when we were kids, but he died when I was 9, so it's not like I've been a fan buying Necco wafers my whole life. It's just weird, some of you know what I mean.
I mean, I have no idea what those wafers are, but I feel deeply for you. We had a similar situation, but here in Austria we could save the Nimitz Schweden bomber.
The Nimitz Schwedenbombe?
Hmm.
Is that right? Tell me.
Yeah, Niemetz is the name of the factory, of the chocolate factory, and the product is called Schwedenbombe, so that translates to Sweden bomb.
Okay.
And I don't know, they're this kind of marshmallow fluffy thing. They're covered in chocolate and they have like some coconut rasps on it. They're really, really good. But over the years, the company that made them, they almost went bankrupt. I mean, I don't know. It looks like Austrians had just forgotten about them a little bit and didn't buy them anymore. But when people heard that the Sweden bomb was about to disappear, they started this kind of Facebook group called Save the Sweden Bomb. And then people went to buy as many Sweden bombs as possible. And in the end, the company was bought by another Austrian chocolate company and the Sweden bomb was saved. And they
Oh,
are
hooray.
delicious, really. I will buy you some once you get here because I can't send you. They don't travel well.
Oh, sure. Yeah, definitely. I'm looking forward to trying one. I would not have gotten you Necco wafers even if I could. They look like communion wafers for any Catholics out there. And we actually used to play mass with them as kids. Like somebody would pretend to be the priest and pass out the Necco wafers.
Oh, the blasphemy.
I know. We're all going to hell. It's fine. But they tasted sort of like chalk with a little bit of flavor. Like LaCroix seltzer has flavor. Such was the flavor intensity of a Necco wafer. Chocolate was the grossest flavor. It was disgusting. And licorice was the best, and I will die on this hill. So I know it's an unpopular opinion, but fight me. I dare you. Not you, but, Boston in general. Oh boy, it'll be fine. I'm sure no one's going to want to fight me about Necco wafers. Probably. Okay. So, but yeah, there's just something super nostalgic about locally made candy, isn't it? Even if you never eat it. I mean, I guess now I'm kind of the reason it closed and now sadly. All right, so let's get back to our stories. Carol DiMaiti, she's in college. She's a smart cookie. She was National Honor Society in high school. She's fun, she's outgoing, and she's working as a waitress when she meets this cook who is more quiet than she is. Everybody said, she was the really fun, vivacious, outgoing one, and he was just this really kind of more quiet guy. They hit it off. Things are happy. It's 1980. Everyone has big hair. Carol graduates with honors from Boston College in 1981, and she gets into Suffolk University Law School. Chuck is still flipping burgers, but Carol doesn't mind that a bit. She is absolutely crazy about him, and she knows that he has a dream to open his own restaurant in Boston one day. Now, eventually, Chuck gets a job at Cactus Brothers, which is a furrier on Newbury Street, which is the most posh shopping street in Boston. It's kind of like Boston's Rodeo Drive. Used to be, I think, that it's so Newbury Street runs from Boston Garden up to Mass Ave. So it's like one long street. And it used to be that the really posh shops were closer to the garden. So near the garden, you have your Balenciaga, Louis Vuitton, those sorts of shops, And then as you get closer to Mass Ave, you'd find funkier, less expensive boutique shops. And finally, Tower Records. We miss Tower Records and Newbury Comics. But in general, if the place has a Newbury Street address, you are going to be paying a really big premium. I only go there now when people are visiting or for Fluvog shoes or Simon Pierce glass. So I go rarely. Chuck worked at the fur store for a few years before they ended up making him manager, which came with a salary of over $100,000 a year in 1985, which, I looked this up, would be like making about $240,000 a year today.
It's always a little bit difficult because, the cost of living is different here in Austria than in the US, but I guess that this is pretty good money still, right?
Oh, yeah. I would say his salary with, a guy that was flipping burgers that went to work retail in a fur store, his salary was more than either my mother, who was a teacher, or my father, who was a social worker, earned, which is kind of fucked, actually, isn't it? But yeah, really good money. I mean, $100,000 a year, over $100,000 a year today is good money, so that long ago, definitely.
I mean, it would be a lot of money here, but our average income is way lower than the average income, I guess, in the States.
Yeah, cost of living
is way higher over there, yeah. Well, yeah.
Well, it depends. In Boston. Boston's one of the big five, isn't it? It's like Boston, New York, most of Hawaii, the Bay Area, and LA, right? I think are the big. It's bad. It's expensive.
What I saw is that the rent is very expensive in those areas, but overall in the States, I think that your groceries are super expensive. Like
Yeah.
fresh produce is really expensive.
Yep. Whenever a family's over from England, they're absolutely shocked at what our
Hmm.
groceries cost. Yeah. Like a loaf of bread is 4.50.
On the other hand, you can drive everywhere and gasoline is super
Gas
cheap.
is so cheap. I know. It's why everyone has giant cars, including us, but dogs. So, all right. So, yep. So it's 1985. This is the year that Carol and Chuck get married at St. James Church, which is in Carol's neighborhood. And she looked beautiful. We have a photo we'll post. It's the 80s. It's in 1985. So it's definitely 80s, but like classy 80s. Do you know what I mean? Like lace and pearls, big veil, really nice. She looked absolutely beautiful, and her family, both families, are thrilled. So the next year in 1986, Carol graduated from Suffolk Law School, and she worked as a tax lawyer at a publishing company in West Newton, which is a wealthy Boston suburb. They bought a house in Reading in 1987. Reading is a more suburban town, more suburban than Medford or Revere. Medford and Revere are both, they're suburbs of Boston, but they're still more urban than I would like. Like I would like to live in the country with like no one. I'm a country mouse. Those cities are a little bit more like a city, whereas Reading is more like a small town, I guess. Hopefully that makes sense. And also my favorite restaurant, Venetian Moon, is in Reading. So if you go to Venetian Moon in Reading, have the tortellini and a port wine cream sauce and a strawberry fresca martini, please. Tell them I said hi. It's my favorite. Okay, so Charles and Carol, they're living the dream. They're happily married. They have a nice house. Charles invests in a bunch of life insurance for them. They're both making really good money, and life is great. And before you go thinking that his buying a lot of life insurance is weird, listen to your crazy Aunt Annie for a moment, because the best gift that you can give your spouse as a wedding present is life insurance and wills. This is a fact, so just get that taken care of, and hopefully you just tuck it away for like 70 or 80 years and you don't need it for a long time.
Oh, definitely. That's absolute solid life advice. It's one of those things that you don't take serious in your 20s, but once you are like in your mid to late 30s, you totally get it. It's like the advice to always take good care of your skin and teeth. Listen to us now, thank us in 30 years.
Yeah, that's right. Floss, use sunscreen, moisturize. Don't spray perfume on your neck and chest. It dries you out and makes you crepey.
Always remove your makeup before you go to bed. Never sleep with your makeup on, really. But enough from our life advice. Back to our couple, back to Carol and Chuck. They sound like they're living the dream.
They are. They are. So they're making good money. They've got a couple of black lab dogs that were named Max and Midnight, and they're both just happy yuppies. They're living the dream, right? So Chuck coaches Little League, and he's known to shovel snow for his elderly neighbors. They jog around the neighborhood together. Life is good. Carol wants to start a family, but Chuck is saving as much money as he can. He's got this dream of opening his own restaurant, as we've said, and he's got a 5-year plan, and he is trying to stick to it, and he's not quite ready for kids. But in early 1989, Carol is pregnant. Chuck is initially not thrilled, but he does come around to the idea. In late October, she is 7 months pregnant, and they are attending Lamaze classes together at Brigham and Women's Hospital, one of the many fine hospitals in this great city. So now it's October 23rd, 1989, and they've gone to Lamaze class. They leave Lamaze class, and at 8:30 p.m., Charles called the police from his car phone to say that he and his wife had been shot and were somewhere in the Mission Hill neighborhood of Boston. The full story he gave, and some of this is after the 911 call, but this is, the full story he gave, was that they were on Huntington Avenue when a man jumped into the back of their car, carjacked them, had them drive to a deserted area of the higher crime area in Boston known as Mission Hill. He steals Carol's jewelry and purse, takes the car keys, but of course Chuck had a spare set. And then Charles says that when he didn't have his wallet on him that night, and when the man realizes he doesn't have his wallet, he accuses him of being 5-0, which means police. And this man, who is described by Chuck as a black man with a raspy voice, wearing a black tracksuit with red stripes, when he hears that he doesn't have his wallet, he assumes he's a cop and then shoots them both before taking off on foot.
Oh my God, that sounds so scary. I guess that's the reason why many people used to lock their car doors while driving. I know that from people who grew up in other countries.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, it's horrible. There's those poor people, and she's pregnant.
I know. And we're going to listen to some of that 911 call now.
My wife's been shot. I've been shot.
Where is this, sir?
I have no idea. I'm off. I've been coming from Tremont. Brigham and Women's Hospital. Straight through Huntington Ave.
Where are you right now, sir? Can you indicate to me?
No, I don't know. He made us go to an abandoned area.
Okay, sir. Can you see out the windows? Can you tell me where you are, please?
No. I don't know. I don't see any signs. Oh, God.
Are you near Brigham and Women's Hospital?
No, we went straight through.
What kind of car do you have, sir?
Pardon me?
What kind of vehicle do you have?
Toyota Cressida.
Toyota Cressida?
Cressida. It's a...
Are you in the city of Boston, though?
Yes.
Can you give me any indication where you might be? Any buildings?
No.
Okay, has your wife been shot as well?
Yes. In the head.
In the head?
Yeah, I ducked down.
How long ago did you leave Brigham and Women's, sir? In what direction did you leave?
2 minutes, 3 minutes. Oh, man.
3 minutes from Brigham and Women's Center.
Oh, man.
Okay, sir, bear with me now. Stand by. Stay on the phone with me. What's your name, sir?
Stuart, Chuck Stuart. Should I try to drive up to the corner to the street?
If you can drive, sir, without hurting yourself, yes, if you could. Just try to give me a cross street. If you can drive, give me any street indication and stay there. I'll get someone right to you right away.
Stop the car. He took the keys, but I have a spare set.
Okay.
Oh, man.
Bear with me, Chuck. I'm going to get someone to you. Hang in with me now.
All right. I'm at a place. Oh, I can't read it.
Just try to read it, Chuck.
I'm coming up to an intersection, but there's no...
Toyota Cressida. What color's your car, buddy?
Street sign. Blue.
Blue Toyota Cressida.
Yeah.
Okay, Chuck, so try to give me a street sign.
Intersection.
Okay, Chuck. Is your wife breathing?
I just feel it gurgling. There's a busy street up ahead. Oh, man. I'm turning onto a busy street. I recognize where I am now. Should I drive to the hospital?
Just tell me what the street is, Chuck.
I'm pulling over. Tremont Street.
Tremont Street?
I can't hear you.
Chuck,
Yes,
where are you, buddy?
Tremont Street.
And what else?
Cash sign.
Tremont Street and what sign? Hang in with me, Chuck. Can you hear me? Chuck,
Yeah.
Tremont Street where?
I don't know. I'm in front of K.
K what?
Oh, man.
Hang in, Chuck. Come on with me now. Chuck, I need you to help me a little bit, and I'll get assistance to you right away. We're on the way, Chuck. Chuck,
Yeah.
can you...
Oh, man. I'm going to pass out.
Can you open the door? Can you open the window?
I'm blanking out.
You can't blink out on me. I need you, man. Chuck.
Interested. My wife has stopped gurgling. She stopped breathing.
Chuck, I'm going to get assistance to you, buddy. Open the door. Talk to someone on the street. Open the door and talk to anyone that passes by, my friend.
All right. There's no one by.
Anybody at all. I want to talk to somebody, find out exactly where you are.
All right.
All right, brother.
Oh, man. Oh.
You hang in there with me. We're going to take care of this now. Help's on the way. Talk to me, Chuck.
Oh.
Where are you shot, Chucky? Chuck? 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 Chuck, are you there? Chuck Stuart? Chuck, can you hear me? Pick up the phone, Chuck.
Hey, wait a minute. You hear the sirens over
Do you
there?
hear the siren? I can hear a siren.
So let's talk about that 911 call a little bit. So you can actually hear the most of the 911 call in its entirety and see everything that went down once police and paramedics arrived, because an episode of documentary show called Rescue 911 was filming in Boston that night, and they were on the scene, so they captured pretty much everything. They did edit some of the more graphic injuries out, Carol's injuries. She was shot in the head, but you see more than enough. But finding them in the first place was hard. Gary McLaughlin was the man who answered the call. And Charles says, my wife's been shot. I've been shot. He can't say where he is. He says he's going to drive a bit. Gary's just trying to get any clue as to where he is. But then, of course, Chuck passes out. So now all these first responders are all over the place and they're trying to find him. And even though Chuck passed out, the line is still open and Gary can hear the occasional sirens through the phone line. This is probably also costing Charles like $2 a minute. Gary has this genius move where he tells all of the first responders to turn off their sirens, and they all go silent. And then one at a time, he has each one of them turn on their siren briefly and then turn it off again. And when he finally hears one through the open line, he's able to say, yes, 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 you're close. Everyone move toward where this guy is. And they finally find the car, which was a blue Toyota, near the corner of St. Alphonsus Street and Horridon Way. So totally genius maneuver on the part of Mr. McLaughlin, who, of course, in all the interviews says, no, it's Charles Stuart who deserves all the credit. He's the hero here, but Mr. McLaughlin, total hero.
That's impressive. That's some quick thinking here. I can say hats off to all the emergency operators and first responders out there. But I have one question. What exactly do you mean when you say it costs him $2 a minute?
Okay, so it's 1989 and Chuck had a car phone, and those were super rare back still, in the late 80s, not common at all. Really, really expensive, and there was nothing like a cellular plan. You would just pay a few dollars a minute, I think.
Yeah, but isn't it free to call 911?
No. So yes, now it is. But back then, there was not a statewide 911. There wasn't a national or statewide 911 until 1990. And calling from your cell phone at that time, it wouldn't necessarily work because although we had statewide 911 in 1990, that would have been from a landline. Cell phones connect differently than the way landlines connect. And so no, he would have had to dial emergency services, a separate number. It wouldn't have been 911, I don't think, from his phone. I actually remember in the late 90s here, you dial star SP for state police to report an emergency on a cell phone. You still wouldn't dial 911. I can't remember exactly when we got 911 on cell phones here, but there is a really good piece that John Oliver did, so I'm going to find that and I'll post it.
That's crazy. That's really crazy. You know what's crazy here? I love your 911 number because it's super easy to remember. We have 3 different numbers here, one for police, one for firefighters, and one for the ambulance.
Oh, right.
It's super confusing.
Yeah. I think 911 was picked because it was easy and because it wasn't used as an area code already. Anyhow, yeah, you can see all of this on Rescue 911 show, which, did I mention, is hosted by William Shatner? He hosts Rescue 911, so that might be worth watching, even if for nothing else. So let's get back to the story, and this is where things get pretty bad. I'm like, let's just keep joking about William Shatner so then I don't have to tell you about this really awful stuff. Okay. You see them take the very pregnant Carol out of the car and they start CPR on her because she's in cardiac arrest. And they put her in an ambulance that's going to take her back to the Brigham, which is what most of us call the Brigham and Women's Hospital, because they have a neonatal ICU there. They have a really good NICU. Charles is also put in an ambulance, and he's headed for Boston City Hospital, which is closer. You can hear him asking as they're like unloading him from onto a stretcher. They're putting him on a stretcher and getting him into the ambulance. And you hear him asking about Carol, saying, please help my wife. How's my wife? Have you checked my wife? And then you see them in the back of the ambulance, and he's answering questions about the attack and what the man looked like and what the man was wearing. Carol arrives at the hospital and they perform an emergency C-section, and their son, Christopher, whose name was chosen because his due date was supposed to be right around Christmas, he's born about 2 months premature. The problem is that because Carol had been without a pulse or oxygen for such a long time, the baby also suffered very, very serious brain damage, and his prognosis was not good. And his mother, Carol Ann DiMaiti Stuart, died at 3 a.m. on October 24th, 1989. She was 30 years old.
Oh, that's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's awful. Meanwhile, over at Boston City Hospital, they're working on Chuck, and he is in really bad shape. He's going to need 2 operations, and he will spend the next 10 days in the intensive care unit and the next 6 weeks in the hospital. So the bullet entered his side and sort of traversed his body diagonally, damaging his bowels badly enough to need a temporary colostomy bag. They also removed his gallbladder and part of his liver. I think part of his urinary tract was damaged too. Carol's funeral, which takes place in the Medford Church where she was married just 4 years before, is attended by Boston's Mayor, Ray Flynn, Chief of Police, Francis Roche, Cardinal Bernard Law, and Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis, but not by Chuck, who is still in intensive care in the hospital. But he writes a letter, which is read during the service, and in it he writes, quote, Good night, sweet wife, my love. God has called you to his hands, not to take you away from me or the happiness and gladness you brought me, but to bring you away from the cruelty and the violence that fills this world. He said that for us to truly believe, we must know that his will was done and that there was some right in this meanest of acts. In our souls, we must forgive this sinner because he would too. My life will be more empty without you, as will the lives of your family and friends. You have brought joy and kindness to every life you've touched. Now you will sleep away from me. I will never again know the feeling of your hand in mine, but I will always feel you. I miss you and I love you. End quote.
Okay, I'm sorry. Maybe I'm going to sound like a bitch now, yeah? Forgive me. But that letter, I don't know, if I die and my husband only has this like generic sounding letter as a last goodbye, I would rise from the dead. Isn't it just super impersonal? Do you know what I mean? Like,
It's very impersonal.
it's so phony.
Foreshadowing.
Okay,
Okay.
I shut up.
No, it's okay. But the media was all over it. It really was. And the funeral was, all over the media. People were just absolutely glued to the story. When they read this letter in the church, people were audibly sobbing. So a lot of people believed it. Both Matthew and Michael Stuart, who are brothers of Chuck's, were pallbearers. They carried their sister-in-law's casket because, of course, her husband, their brother, was still in the hospital with their dying son. The DiMaiti and Stuart families support each other in their grief. While Chuck is in the hospital, Carol's parents have members of the family over for supper on a regular basis. They're all just doing the best they can. 17 days after the shooting, Charles asks to hold his son before removing him from life support. And Christopher passes away on November 9th, 1989. He was 17 days old. And honestly, I know this bit is sad, but I think it was also a gift because my understanding is that the brain damage that he would never recover from, and he was suffering. Let's just say he was suffering. We don't need to get into the details. After Christopher dies and the funerals, the city is just in an uproar. There's talk of bringing back the death penalty, and overt systemic racism in Boston becomes, let's just say, it's even more problematic. So a little bit of context here. It had not been that long since the Boston busing crisis took place, and I'm only going to touch on this because it's a hugely important topic that deserves its own podcast. But essentially what happened was that the courts found that Boston schools were still segregated, essentially. This was in 1974. In 1974, we were still super segregated. Now, I don't think it was a situation where there were schools for black kids and schools for white kids. I think it had just sort of neighborhood by neighborhood become that way. And please message me if I'm wrong about that. I hope I'm not. But yeah, in 1974, the city was ordered by a judge to desegregate by busing. So black kids were bused to predominantly white schools and white kids were bused to predominantly black schools. Now, do you want to guess which buses full of children were pelted with rocks and bricks by screaming adults? Wasn't the buses full of white kids? Police were called in to try and keep the peace, and this started some anti-police sentiment that cops were traitors for protecting black kids. It's incredibly shameful, all of this is. So, of course, the racist protesters are holding signs with the N-word for children. Remember, these are children. This is the thing I cannot get over. And they're the most vocal, who show up constantly protesting. Not everybody felt that way, not by a long shot, but still, it was bad. Black children were not safe on those buses, and they were not safe in the schools that they were moved to. Kids stopped going to school. Families moved out of the city to the suburbs in a really dramatic white flight just to keep the kids in whiter schools. It was a disaster, and it turned out that a lot of people in Boston in the 70s were just racist as hell. I'm going to link to a good article by our local NPR station about it, but the busing crisis just started a really long, dark chapter in Boston's history, and it was still really going on right up until 88, when it finally seemed to be maybe getting a little bit better until this happened.
I'm a little bit shocked because I always heard, like, I've never been to Boston, but I heard that it's nowadays a very liberal city. I think that's crazy that this only happened a few decades ago, and then this crime happened right when the racial tensions from the school crisis started to dissolve. That's bad.
Yeah, yeah. Boston is a liberal city, I would say. And it's better now. Obviously, it's much better now than it was. But there's still plenty of racism. I mean, just like there is everywhere in this country, racism here is still incredibly systemic. We have a long, long way to go. But it was definitely much, much worse back then. And this shooting of a white couple, especially an obviously pregnant woman, did not help matters. And I just really want to be very upfront here and say that I'm a white woman from a middle class background who honestly cannot speak personally from experience about racism or poverty. I've never worried about where my next meal would come from. But, my mom taught in inner city schools in Springfield, Massachusetts, and my dad was a social worker in the same neighborhoods. And I would hear them talking about kids that they were trying to help, just incredibly sad, difficult stories. I'd sometimes hear them talking when I was supposed to be in bed. And so I know how lucky I am. I know how tremendously privileged I am. And I know it's a fact that racism was and still is an enormous problem in this country. And we have a really long way to go. And it's important to talk about. So I don't want to skip over it. I want to talk about it, but that's what I can tell you about it now in the context of our story. So we still have a long way to go. So officers are swarming the Mission Hill area trying to find this black man in a black tracksuit with red stripes and a raspy voice and a silver gun. And in Mission Hill, there's no shortage of suspects. Stop and frisk became the norm. Even strip searches of young black men being forced to drop their pants on the street. It was bad.
Okay, wait, I'm confused. What would having a suspect drop their pants help? I mean, that sounds like a trick or like...
Yeah. So my understanding is that this went beyond stop and frisk, which many, myself included, would probably argue is racist anyway. Stop and frisk is when a cop can stop and ask somebody a couple of questions for any reason, and based on how they answer, so it's all very subjective, right? Determine if they then feel that the person should then be frisked. So a pat down, sort of like what you get if you were going through airport security, right? And you get pulled aside. They'll do a pat down. So they were doing stop and frisk. And as a result, they were finding and arresting a lot of non-murderers on non-murdery things, like somebody might have a joint on them or somebody might have a pocket knife on them. But they would do also it seems like they did actual strip searches. Like they would make men remove their pants on the street. Do you know what I mean? Like strip them down to their underpants, which I keep reading this over and over and over again, and it's so beyond horrifying to me.
Where's the sense in that? I just don't understand.
Well, there was so much pressure. So they're just trying to find anything that would lead them to find the person who had done this.
I mean,
right?
I completely get that part, yeah.
Yeah.
And I get being patted down, and I understand all of that, but isn't patting down people like enough? You don't have to undress them in the street.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, this is all just, it's beyond. Also, though, the cops were being ordered to do this, right? So there's super heavy pressure from the highest levels of state government and the national media. So the police are doing what they're told, but what they're being told to do is wrong. It's bad. It's really bad. A couple of men were picked up and held in suspicion of the crime, including a homeless black man who just happened to be black and had a black tracksuit. I think he was held for like 30 days before they released him because of a complete lack of evidence. But at last, it seemed 2 days after baby Christopher died, it seemed like police had found the right man. His name was William Bennett, and he was a 39-year-old black man with a raspy voice who was already in custody on a charge of armed robbery of a video store. Now, a lot of people think that the arrest of Willie Bennett was set up because he was a black man, and they blame his arrest on corrupt police. And there was, as we've said, plenty of racism to go around. But I would argue that that isn't necessarily the case here. Here's what happened. His nephew had bragged to friends that his uncle was the one who had shot the couple, and police got wind of this rumor. And then also, William Bennett was known by police and known well. I found an AP article. Associated Press is the AP article dated January 15, 1990. It's by Dana Kennedy. She writes about his criminal past, and she says, quote, his lawyer confirmed included 38 arraignments and 60 arrests. Bennett was first arrested when he was 14 on a charge of taking money out of parking meters. He has spent much of his adult life in prison. In 1973, he was convicted of shooting a police officer, among other charges, and spent 5 years at the state prison in Walpole. He returned to prison in 1981 after being convicted on assault and armed robbery charges. The Boston Globe reported Friday that Bennett once shot a cab driver who was a double amputee because the man had only $42 on him. Bennett's attorney was unable to confirm the account to the AP, and police would not comment. End quote.
Okay, so a career criminal who also had shot a police officer, shot a cab driver with a raspy voice. I mean, the MO kind of fits. And there are already rumors, so I can see why they would be pretty confident that they had the right guy there.
Yeah, exactly. I think, in his defense, that the cop that he shot him in the leg. And I don't think he ever murdered anyone or tried to. But of course, there's no reason to think he wouldn't have, right? If the circumstances were correct. Anyone into true crime knows with a rap sheet like that, right? How often does a long list of less serious crimes show up before all of a sudden there is a rape or a murder? So,
I mean, everybody starts somewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they were desperate for an arrest. They really were. There was just so much outrage over this case, so much fear and anger, and the people living in Mission Hill were going through hell. It was just, it was a really, really bad scene. So as soon as Chuck was able to leave the hospital, police brought him in for a lineup, and Chuck picked Willie Bennett out of a group on December 28th, 1989.
Oh, that's good. So he identified him as the attacker. That's pretty solid evidence, I think. Unless, wait, had he seen photos of him in the papers before the lineup?
I think he might have. And I think also Bennett had been in prison for a while because remember he was already in prison on an unrelated charge for robbing a video store. God, remember video stores? I think that the other people that were brought into the lineup were maybe cops who were better groomed. So like Willie was the one that was looking a little bit rougher around the edges. I've read a few different accounts and I'm not entirely sure how he chose him, but a lot of things said he had a visceral reaction to Bennett. See, I'm not completely sure why he pointed to Bennett, but he did. And that's when things went from bad to worse. Just a couple of days after Charles had picked Willie Bennett out of the lineup, he drove the new $22,000 Nissan Maxima that he had bought with some of the insurance money from Carol's death. He traded in his old bloody Toyota and got a new car. He drove to the Sheraton in Braintree, checked in. Braintree's just a little bit south of Boston. And so he checks in and requests a 4:30 a.m. wake-up call. He gets the wake-up call, he gets into his car, he drives into Boston, stopping his car on the lower deck of the Tobin Bridge. He popped the hood, turned on his hazard lights. He was supposed to have dinner with Carol's parents that night. They were making chicken, a special for him, just because he was on a special diet while his intestines were still healing from the bullet wounds. But he wouldn't make it to dinner. He left his driver's license and a note on the passenger seat, and then he jumped from the bridge, landing in the icy Mystic River 135 feet below him, ending his life. When Carol's parents found out that their son-in-law, who called them Mom and Dad, had died by suicide, they were so devastated. They felt like they had lost their son, who had jumped because his grief was so deep that he couldn't take it anymore. And Carol's dad had to be taken to the hospital. He was so upset.
I feel so bad for Charles. Poor guy. He couldn't go on to live without his wife and son. It's sad.
Well, don't feel too bad, because when police found his car around 7 that morning, at first they weren't sure what to believe, and they thought it might be a hoax, until they retrieved his body from the river, because they knew something that Carol's parents did not.
Oh, no. What?
So on January 3rd, 1990, the day before Chuck jumped from the bridge, his younger brother, 23-year-old Matthew, could not bear the guilt anymore and went to police to tell them what really happened. Because a black man had not murdered Carol and her baby, Charles had murdered his wife and son and blamed it on a black man, and then had the audacity to place the blame on an innocent man. I mean, Willie Bennett was not a good guy, but he sure as hell didn't shoot a pregnant woman in the head.
What? I mean, that comes out of nowhere now. That doesn't make any sense. Like, the police never suspected Charles. He was shot. He almost died.
That's it. That's the thing, right? So did you know that the leading cause of death of pregnant women is murder, usually by their partner?
It's shocking.
Yeah, it's literally the leading cause of death of pregnant women is murder. It's completely horrific. And in this case, early on, the police did, in fact, talk to a number of Chuck's surgeons asking, listen, do you think there's any chance the guy did this to himself? And all the doctors said, no, there's no way that this gunshot wound was self-inflicted because he had come so close to dying. Like, if it had taken just a few more minutes for them to find him, he might not have made it. Also, at the time, from when they loaded him into the ambulance to when he wrongfully accused Willie in the lineup, his story just never changed, you know? And plus, there was no gun at the scene, jewelry in Carol's purse was gone. Turns out he wasn't just the worst husband and father, he was also just a terrible shot as well. He probably meant for it to be a much less severe wound, and he just, like, I'm imagining that he, like, stuck his own hand behind his back, like making a chicken wing kind of arm, and then probably meant to graze his side, but instead it went diagonally, like I think it went from his back right side to his front left side.
Are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah.
I'm here shaking my head.
I
I'm
know,
like,
I know.
what
I
the
really
hell
wanted,
is going on?
I know, and I really wanted to tell you the story this way because this is how we all heard it. Do you know what I mean? It was like everybody was like, oh God, this is so bad.
Usually it happens to you that you feel sorry for the guys that turn out to be like the complete sociopath.
I know. Now you know what it feels like. Yeah, so yeah, this is when the very carefully constructed facade of a life that Chuck had built started to crumble because there were so many lies. Liar. All right, so going as far back as his education, he didn't have a football scholarship to Brown. Ivy League universities, they don't offer sports scholarships, but Chuck didn't know that. And to be fair, neither did I until I started researching this podcast episode. But yeah, in reality, Chuck studied culinary art at the Vogue Tech School in nearby Wakefield, where we did an episode on there, the Badger murder. It's a great school. And he was not a football star. I think he played baseball and maybe soccer. I can't remember now. It's not important. But he was a well-liked student who never got into any trouble. He did go on to attend Salem State in 1979, but he never graduated. He dropped out after 2 months. Everything was a lie on his resume, and he hadn't been happy about the baby. In fact, when Carol told him she was pregnant, at first, he really tried hard for her to get an abortion. But of course, she's a Catholic girl, and she desperately wanted to start a family. She was really happy about the pregnancy. So, you know, she refused. She did think he came around, and that's not uncommon, you know, like somebody could be a little bit shocked at first and then warm to the idea. But no, he never did. He had not warmed.
I mean, there are ways to prevent the pregnancy if you don't want to have kids, you know.
Yes. Get a vasectomy. Wear a condom. Like, there were so many. Yeah. So he's the worst. He's the fucking worst. We hate him. So she believed, you know, that he had come around, and obviously he was going to Lamaze classes with her. But apparently, while all of this was going on, he was making jokes to friends about wanting her dead.
Har, 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 what a funny guy. How does a conversation like this go?
I mean, I think it's like he must have just been like, oh boy, wives, can't live with them, can't live without them. You know what I mean, Joe? Or can you? Hey, pal, do you know anyone who could kill my wife? And then everyone just looks at him like crickets chirping. Like, what the? What? And then he's like, no, kidding. I kid. You know how I kid. I joke. It's funny.
Oh my God.
How? I have no idea. Yeah. So it was one of those things where, like, once the truth came out, there were fucking red flags left, right, and center. Just a big old box of red flags. But it was all 2020, right? So it later came out that he had told a friend he thought that Carol now had the upper hand in their relationship. And worse, she wanted to take time off and stay home with the baby and have another baby. And all he could see was her lost income and more mouths to feed, keeping him from his goal of a restaurant, which is like...
I mean, I totally get that. I can understand that. But as I said, if you don't want to have kids and don't want to start a family, be clear about it and just don't start a family. Not go to Lamar, or even if that happens and it was an accident and she wants to keep the baby, leave. Sure. I mean, it's not the nicest and best thing to do.
Yeah.
But I can understand that. If you don't want to have kids, you don't want to have kids. Yeah.
That's
you don't
right.
want to be.
You don't need to
but
kill them.
You don't have to kill a woman and her unborn child.
Yeah,
Like,
it's completely fucked. He's the worst. And it
wow.
fills me with rage because he was just so clearly a sociopath, right? He had lied, charmed, manipulated every single person in his life. And he had been planning the death of his very loving wife, I think, for a long time. And it's just, like you were saying, even if he didn't want to be part of the marriage anymore, they were doing fine. He had a really good salary. He still could have opened his stupid fucking restaurant. I think she was making more than him, and he was making over $100,000 a year. So they were
But I mean,
making a lot of money.
and the other thing is, he lied about things that weren't necessary that he lied about. Like, for example, about his
Right.
education. Like, wasn't it enough that he was at a school learning, what was it, like culinary school or
Cooking.
something,
Yeah,
and that
yeah.
he was very well liked and that he was
Sure.
a student, but it was not enough. He had to, like,
Lie about
outdo
an Ivy
himself.
League
Yeah.
school and a fake football injury and all
Like,
this.
wow.
It's just why? And then there were a lot of rumors. So there was a younger woman. I mean, they were all pretty young. I think Chuck was 29 or 30 when he died. But there was a younger woman in her early 20s. I think she was a grad student. So she worked at the Furrier during the summers. And she was doing, I think, grad work at Brown University, the same college Chuck lied about attending. And we know she made phone calls to him when he was in the hospital using his calling card. And we also know that he bought jewelry that people think was for her on January 2nd. So after he's out of the hospital, before his brother goes to police. But she never accepted it. I think that I'm not naming her because I think this was just a relationship in Chuck's mind. I think in Chuck's mind, he was already moving on and this was all going to work out fine. And look at this young girl would be, do you know what I mean? And I don't think she had anything to do with any of this. As far as we know, she had a boyfriend and she might have been calling him in the hospital as a friend or checking in on him as an employee, like, hey, we're all calling to check in and see how you're doing. But I think that relationship was just in his head.
He was the manager. It would make sense that she called.
Yeah, exactly.
There are a million reasons. Or
so many. So many. And it could be she didn't know. I have no idea. But I'm not bringing up her name because I don't think she needs to be still a part of this story anymore. Wherever she is, I hope she's doing well.
So what actually happened that night? I want to know.
Yeah, okay. So the night before the shooting, Chuck's younger brother Matthew, the one who went to the police, he met him in Mission Hill in the same abandoned area where everything went down, and they went over the plan. They practiced what they were going to do. Matthew, however, believed that this was all an insurance fraud scheme. Now, I read a few sources that said that Chuck had pulled schemes like this before, maybe even stealing furs from the store that he managed.
Why am I not surprised?
This is the thing, right? So they meet that night, and the plan is that Chuck will pass his brother-in-law the handbag, and then he'll toss that along with the gun. A gun, by the way, that Chuck had stolen from the safe at the Cactus Brothers Furriers. They had bought a gun for security ages ago, but then had like a private security firm, and so they just left the gun that they had bought in the safe all the time. So Chuck had that's where he got the gun. He stole it from the Furrier. Then Matthew was supposed to take all this stuff and throw it into a river, and then Chuck would have, submitted an insurance claim for their rings and made more money and all that great stuff. So, yeah, I don't understand people. So then on the night of the murder, that is what happens. He passes his brother Carol's bag with their wedding rings and the gun. Now, Matthew says he did not know when Chuck passed him this stuff that his sister-in-law had been shot. Yeah.
Yeah, but what was he thinking that she was in on? I'm just really like...
I think I don't know. It would have been a pretty dark area, and I think Matthew either thought that she was in on it or that
she wasn't there.
She was asleep, or that she might have been slumped over at that point and not as visible. I don't really...
The whole plan just doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, imagine your sister comes here and says, we're gonna do some insurance fraud. I'm gonna pass in a car. I'm gonna give you a bag with stuff in it. Throw it away.
I can't...
We'd be like, okay.
Yeah, no, I can't imagine. I can't imagine any of this. It's so... Listen, plus he's Catholic. I swear to God, I feel guilty every day. Like, I constantly have it's probably just anxiety, but it feels just like low level guilt and like just a hint of shame kind of all the time. So anyway, I don't know how this good Catholic boy went. Well, I know exactly how he did it. He was a complete
That's
antisocial
phony.
personality
Yeah.
disorder. Yeah. He passes his brother this stuff. And then this is where things get really fucking diabolical, right? Because then Chuck calls emergency services and he pretends to be lost. And he keeps this up with our dispatcher. What was his name?
McLaughlin?
Yes. Yes. And
McLovin.
this up with Mr. McLaughlin, the hero. And I think specifically that he did this to make absolutely certain that Carol and his son would not survive.
Yeah, but
Because
he was hurt too, so he's not only an asshole and a sociopath, he's also fucking stupid.
I know he really is. But I think the whole driving around and pretending he didn't know where he was thing and
Yeah.
like, oh, let me see if I can just drive. I think that was all a farce. And then eventually he was going to get to a point and say, oh, I'm here. But he
Yeah.
fucked up and he passed out. Yeah. Anyway, so Matthew, he throws all this stuff off the Pines River Bridge in Revere. They're later recovered from the water. And Matthew did apparently tell his brother Michael, who was a firefighter, about what happened just 3 days after Carol's murder. He told Michael. So that means when both of them were pallbearers at Carol's funeral, they knew that their brother was responsible for her death. And they knew it when they went for supper at the DiMaiti house.
That's so disgusting.
I know. I don't know how they did it. I mean, I do get protecting I do sometimes think about that. Like, is there anything I wouldn't do to protect my sister? And I don't know. I don't know. But I sure as hell wouldn't turn up to someone's house for supper.
Exactly that
you know.
that part. Yeah.
Yeah. Matthew says he absolutely cannot bear this guilt anymore. He's just completely devastated by it. I mean, I think he had a tremendous amount of guilt, but then when his brother had pointed out an innocent man in the lineup, well, innocent as far as this crime goes, and then Willie is arrested, and so he just had to come clean about what he knew. He tells his brother Michael that he's going to go to the police, and Michael urges him to wear a wire or like carry a recorder and confront Charles before he goes to the police because he wants. I read a quote where he had said something along the lines of, I knew I already lost one brother either to jail or death, and I wanted to try to save my other brother, Michael, meaning Matthew. And so he says to Matthew, wear a wire, get this all on tape so that it's very, very clear that you did not know what was happening that night. But Matthew doesn't do that. He just goes to the police. And I think the Stuart family all covered this up to varying degrees, at least from around the very end of December or a day or two leading up to this confession. And none of them were happy about Matthew's plan to confess. It seems like his family kind of shunned him for turning in his brother. And it's just so hard for me because I just don't know how they did it. I really, really don't. I don't know how they all shielded him from the truth. And I don't know how the DiMaiti family came to terms with it. Although I think from a lot of the quotes I've read, it seems, and rightly so, that they really do consider pretty much everyone a victim of Charles, which I get,
I mean, he seemed to be a master manipulator.
Just total antisocial, charming. So Matthew pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. And he very tearfully, and I believe heartfeltly, apologized to his in-laws for his role in all of this. He was sentenced to 3 to 5 years in prison, but I think this actually had a much heavier toll on him than anyone realized. After his release from prison, he went back to prison briefly on drug charges, and he had a pretty hard life after that. And on September 3rd, 2011, he was found dead of an apparent drug overdose in the bathroom of a homeless shelter in Cambridge.
That's sad.
Yeah,
That's really
it really
sad.
is. He had a daughter, too. It's really sad. Listen, he wasn't a perfect person. None of us are. He made mistakes, big ones. But I think Chuck ruined his life. I really do. In happier news, in January 1990, the DiMaiti family announced that it was establishing the Carol DiMaiti Stuart Foundation. I'm actually surprised they kept Stuart in there because her tombstone does not have Stuart on it. She and Christopher are buried under the name DiMaiti. But they did. They started a foundation. It was a scholarship fund in memory of Carol with the goal of providing scholarships to young people from Boston's Mission Hill area and to fund activities that would work against racism and violence in Boston. By early 2006, the foundation had awarded $1.2 million in scholarships to 220 students, which is amazing. I actually tried to find out more. I wanted to send a donation from us because we did send a donation to the Lauren Astley Foundation, but the foundation seems to be defunct now. It's all done. But I do want to say just a little bit about Mission Hill because I drove through there every day for years in the late 90s through the worst parts of it. I'd get off on Melnia Cass and take Melnia Cass right down to Columbus, and local people know what I'm talking about. I lived in JP in Mission Hill and worked on Huntington Ave for years. And yeah, there were and there still are some bad neighborhoods in Mission Hill. But there are bad areas of every neighborhood, even in the Back Bay. And Mission Hill has lots of house porn, including those triple deckers in the Victorian Queen Anne style, which, I love. And yeah, some parts are definitely poor, but that doesn't mean they're violent. And after the white flight caused by the busing crisis and the Stuart murders, a lot of slumlords bought up buildings, which is a whole other ongoing issue. But now often those buildings are rented by college students because it's bordered by more affluent communities, and so it's a little bit more affordable. It's why I lived there. But whether you're in a project, raising your family, renting for a while you finish school, everyone in Mission Hill is just doing the best they can to get by. And what was done to the people of color in Mission Hill in the winter of '89 was all caused by this one man's incredibly selfish, sociopathic greed. It's just awful. It's awful. I have nothing but fond memories of Mission Hill. I got nothing but love for Mission Hill. Shout out to anybody listening in that neighborhood. It's a problem. I mean, it is. I think it was either Roxbury or Dorchester. The kids there just did a huge walkout protesting gun violence there because it's still a problem, and it's really sad. So there were a couple of made-for-TV movies about this case. I did not watch either of them. I was going to, but then I read how upset her parents were. I think her parents were just really upset about people making money off of what happened to their family, which I get 100%. I think they filed a civil suit to stop the Stuart family or, any of that from making money off of any of this, like selling stories, that kind of thing, which I 100% agree with and support. And that's also the reason that I didn't want to call this case the Charles Stuart case, even though that's how most people know it. So talking to like friends this week or whatever and saying, yeah, I'm doing the Carol DiMaiti murder and who? The Chuck Stuart case. Oh, right. So it's like, but it just, I don't know. It just kind of bothers me. I want more people to remember Carol DiMaiti and Christopher DiMaiti and just think about Charles Stuart when they think about racism, greed, and cowardice. That he took a really bright, lovely light out of the world too soon. So yeah, I just wanted to tell her story.
I think it's very important to talk about these kind of things.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I just why did he have to say it was a black guy? I mean, you cringe every time. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's probably not as big a thing there, honestly, but here it's such a thing where it's like a black guy did it, a black guy. It's like,
yeah, I get it. But I mean, that was the 80s. It was probably the easiest thing for him to say. I don't think
100%. It was totally the right move. It worked. It worked.
What was the name again of the lady who killed her kids and said a black guy did it?
Susan Smith, I think. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep, exactly. So, yeah, very, 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 very sad story. And I drive over the Tobin Bridge all the time. This is all all of these communities are really near where I live, so it's sad. And it was interesting to do this because this happened in '89, so I was 12. So I knew this was happening, but also I wasn't at an age where I paid too much attention to this stuff.
Yeah.
So
it
was
meh, whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. I was just, I don't know, listening to New Kids on the Block and I don't know. All right. Do you have anything good? Tell me something good. Let's talk about happy things. Please.
Something good that happened this week. I took the car and the dogs and I drove to my mom's. So that's 1.5 hours one way, so 3 hours in total. Because we were celebrating my sister's birthday and we had a barbecue and it was a super nice sunny fall day, but not too hot. And we had the most delicious birthday cake. My mom makes this super moist chocolate sponge with ganache and it's the most delicious cake ever, ever. Maybe I can get the recipe for you guys.
Yes, please.
And my dad was there, which is lovely because
nice.
My parents, they are divorced for many, many years now, 23, 24 years, 20, 21 years, something like that.
Yeah.
But nowadays, they can have a nice Saturday afternoon barbecue with their significant others. My mom is married again. We have a half brother. And of course, I'm just so super proud of myself for driving there all by myself because as I said already another time, it's a big deal for me after not driving for many, many years.
Yeah,
And yeah, I drove back in the dark.
it's
And
huge.
it was good. It was
I'm really
good.
proud of you. That's awesome. Awesome. I totally want your mom's recipe. I do like cake. Okay. Now I want cake. Yeah, my something good was I made it out of the house. We had concert tickets to go see The Who at Fenway Park, which was great. I love The Who. They're one of my favorite bands. I tried to get little clips of all the songs that are used in the CSI credits for our little Facebook group. Originally, I was going to try to go live and be like, hey, everybody, but there is no signal in the middle of
Really?
Fenway Park. Yeah, it's like we had seats on the field. I don't know if we're like just surrounded by a Faraday cage or what the deal was, but we had no signal at all. But yeah, so anyway, it was awesome to see The Who live. We have another show this week. So I had a really, really close friend, April, who was amazing. She was just the best. She got sick and she was my like healthy, veggie eating, organic, everything organic, hot yoga every morning, gym every night, marathon running. And she got lung cancer and it had spread. And when she first got sick, I had said, what should we do? What do you want to do for this birthday? You know, and because she was all about making memories while she had time, because we knew she didn't have a lot. And she said, I wish I'd seen more live shows. And so we started going to concerts as often as we could. And so she passed away in 2013, and I miss her every day. But we kept that up. We keep going to live shows as often as we can. For me, unfortunately, it often means that we buy tickets and I can't go to things like I missed the Rolling Stones and I missed Sia twice and I've missed OK Go. I've missed a lot of shows because I'm sick. I'm not well enough to leave the house a lot of the time. But I would rather buy the ticket and hope I can go than never buy the ticket and never try.
You are so lucky over there because you get a lot of great opportunities to go to shows. We don't have that here. Like, we are over the moon if there is a European tour of the Stones or of the Beach Boys or like, and you just randomly, like, what was the last time you messaged me? Like, oh, Brian Wilson is in town tonight. And I'm like,
Yeah,
fuck, what?
he was. And he was at the Lynn Auditorium, I
Yeah,
think,
but
which
he
is
didn't
like,
do the show then because
that's
I
right.
think he canceled a
Did.
lot of shows. He wasn't well for a
Yeah.
while now.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. You're right. But that's what we'll have to plan your trip because your husband likes the
Dropkick Murphys.
Dropkick Murphys, right? Yeah.
He loves
We'll
them.
have to plan a visit around taking you guys to a show because that would be
That would be
really
super
fun.
awesome.
And then
Yeah.
I think the day this drops, I'm gonna be at ZZ Top. We got meet and greet tickets
Really?
at one. Yeah. I'm like, should I wear a push-up bra and ask him to sign my boobs, or is that 1985? I've never done that. I wouldn't. That's a joke, Dad. Oh, and I should mention there's a new show on Showtime called City on a Hill, starring Kevin Bacon, and it's a cop drama that takes place right after this case happened. So it's all about like racist Boston and the police in the early 90s post Stuart murders. It's on Showtime, so check that out if you have it. Oh, this week we wanted to send a shout out to Teresa, who is in Louisville, Kentucky. She's the first one who got our music, isn't it? Yep.
She was the first one who asked if it was Mozart's Lacrimosa.
Which it is. We chose Mozart, obviously, because he is from Vienna.
He
Austria.
died in Vienna.
He died in Vienna. Where was he from?
Salzburg.
I knew you'd know that.
Of
Are
course.
you itchy little dog? You okay?
Did
Is
I
that
ever tell you the story about my first husband?
No.
He was, I think you already know by now, he was Mexican. He is Mexican.
Yeah.
We're divorced. And when he came here with me, well, we were living in Mexico together, but then my dad got really sick and I wanted to come home to Austria. So we moved here. We were already married and he came with me and he started to learn German. And it's super difficult because the way you properly speak German and you learn German is not the way people speak on the street. It's very, very difficult. We like change vocals. We make words shorter. It's hard. It's really hard. So he was at my family's and we say Mahlzeit when we eat, yeah. But in the dialect that we speak, it's like Moizet. And he's like there and he's looking at us and then he turns to me and he says, it's so awesome how Austrian people love classical music and how much they adore Mozart. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, we have Mozart Kugeln and all that kind of stuff, but why you're saying that? Like, because before you eat, you say Mozart. And I'm like, no. But it was a running gag in my family for a very long time.
I could totally see that. Oh,
I
that's
thought it was
awesome.
very cute.
Yeah, that is cute. So thanks, Teresa. She wrote us a really nice review, so we really appreciate that. That always makes our day.
When we started this, I don't know if it was the same for you as it was for me. I thought like, yeah, okay, maybe every episode like 50 people are gonna listen and most of them are our friends.
And
And then when you
family.
start, yeah, family, and then when you start getting messages from people who you never met, who only know your voice and they write the kindest and nicest things, it's
It's really
really,
nice.
wow. It's like,
Yeah. No, I'm the same. I'm always shocked because sometimes you'll send me because you do Instagram because I can't upload a picture without cropping it in a weird way. Apparently, I have problems with Instagram, and you'll send me the nicest things when anytime people post something nice about us, and I'm like, I can't believe strangers like us.
yeah.
Like, I can't believe anybody we don't know would tune in for this. I thought we'd do like 10 episodes and be like, well, we gave it a go.
I mean, the thing is, we really love doing it, and then it feels so amazing if people like what you're doing.
Yeah,
Like,
that's true. It's true. Tiny dog. There's a tiny dog with me right now that we're watching. She's licking my husband's pillow, which I'm sure he'll be thrilled about later. He won't mind one bit. Not one bit. So, what else do we need to say before we say goodbye to
we're on
everybody?
Twitter now. Well, we were on Twitter the whole time, but we're learning Twitter. I really start to like it. We are Fresh Hell Pod on Twitter. Come follow us. Come message us. Come follow us on Instagram. Please join our Facebook group because it's a really cool group and we are having the nicest discussions and we have a lot of laughs there and
We
it's great.
do. It really is. It's a really nice, fun group. People really like your Mugshot Fridays. We talk about murder and we post a lot of weird memes. We're here for it. Oh, tell your dogs we said hi. We know your cats don't give a shit. And what else? We did talk about suicide again on this episode. So, as always, international resources are pinned in our Facebook group should you or someone you know need them. And is there anything else?
Yeah, if you liked our show, please do us the honor of rating and review us. If you didn't like our show and you really want to review us, please don't make us cry. Be
Yeah, please
kind.
don't make us cry. That's a fair ask, I think. And yeah, thanks so much again for listening. Friends, we really love you. And until next week, if you yourself are going through hell,
Keep going. Tschüss.
bye.